Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, RB Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the content, or we appreciate all the support on our content. Excuse me. It is 1 a.m. But yes, we are here live, and we are going to be recapping the 7 and 8 play-in tournament matchups that just occurred. You know, we had a pretty good game in the second one, but we had a lackluster one in the first. But we're going to break it down, give our thoughts, opinions, predictions on some upcoming stuff, and we can potentially talk about, some new playoff matchups that have been officially decided as of today. Before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates. Chris, kick us off, man.
Yes, so we just got through the first batch of play-in games for these playoffs, and we had the Atlanta Hawks and the Orlando Magic and the Grizzlies and the Warriors, right? Not a whole lot to say about the East play-in game, right? The Magic ended up winning 120-95. We predicted that the Magic would win this game beforehand, and I think it just kind of had to do with the Magic. I feel like just defensively present some problems for the Hawks. Then you got to factor in the Hawks are without Jalen Johnson, although in fairness, the Magic are without Jalen Suggs. And it was just, for the Hawks, defense has been a major problem, especially since those injuries happened. And I mean, you kind of look at the box score for the Hawks, like Trae Young had 28, but didn't do a whole lot in the first half, took over in the third and got the Hawks, within striking distance. Then in the fourth, the game got away from all of them. Guys like Cole Anthony and Anthony Black heated up, and then Trae Young got tossed, and that was kind of that. I mean, you look at the Magic stars, Paolo at 17, 9 and 7, Franz at 13 and 13, but they weren't super efficient. But a lot of the other guys, supporting cast, played really well. That was kind of the difference in the game. 19 and 7 from Wendell Carter Jr., 16 and 4 from Anthony Black, and then what was it? 26 and 6 off the bench for Cole Anthony. You got two guys off the bench who gave you, 42 points. And the thing with Orlando is they're not really an offensive team, right? They're really more of a defensive team. And, when you have guys off the bench that can give you that kind of firepower, it can kind of tip the scales. But, I think the problem is going into the playoffs, it's just kind of hard to fathom the Magic being too much of a challenge for Boston, just from the perspective of the lack of offense even before the injuries. And now it's even more problematic. And the Celtics have, a lot more firepower than the Hawks do. Maybe they can get a game where they have, a night like this, where they just have some guys on the roster that have a really hot shooting night. But that series probably doesn't go much more than like 5, if I had to guess.
Yeah.
And then the Hawks drop into the lower part.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. We kind of somewhat predicted it. I think we believe that their defensive identity was probably going to be, the absolute reason for them winning this game. And, like you said, you got some solid contributions, some great contributions, actually, from your bench and, some of your role players. But yeah, I think the ceiling for this team is a little bit lower just because of the injuries and the lack of creation and things of that nature. So I really am expecting them to try and continue to build through the draft and, get better. But yeah, I don't really think there's too much that needs to be said about this matchup.
Yeah, and then for the Hawks, they will await the winner of the 9-10 in the East. But now we get to the second one, which was much better game. Warriors, Memphis Grizzlies. Warriors winning 121-116. This was another one that we kind of expected the outcome. We expected the Warriors to win. Didn't expect it to be as competitive. It wasn't, like the Grizzlies kind of got off to a hot start. Then the Warriors came back, went up by 20 in the first half. Then the Grizzlies roared back. No pun intended, honestly. And then they were able to get really close. Then Ja got hurt, right? Then he was out for a little bit. Desmond Bane kind of let it come back a little bit. Then Ja came back, and they were kind of able to get it under control, but they just weren't quite able to close it out. You look over at the Warriors side, 37 from Steph, 38 from Jimmy Butler. Not much else from some other. I mean, Quentin Post had 11, Gary Payton had 12, and they kind of played off some of the other guys. But I don't know. I actually did not really expect the Grizzlies to put up a fight. I kind of expected them to get pummeled when they were down 20. We know they've not been very good against winning teams for the last couple of months. But they did show some heart and they fought back. But for the Grizzlies, really the difference was, their two bigs just couldn't give them enough, right? Like Jaren Jackson Jr. had 18, but was 6 of 15 from the field, was 4 of 9 from 3, but couldn't get anything going inside. Again, he made 6 shots, 4 of them were threes, so nothing really inside the basket. And then Zach Edey had 17 rebounds, 14 points, but 4 of 11 from the field. Another guy that kind of struggles to score around the rim. Golden State was physical, which they needed to be, and made it tough, right? And that's kind of what you need to do for this matchup. We got a couple of comments: Warriors, Rockets, Curry, Butler show ran past Memphis, and that was kind of how this game ended up going. Looked like the Warriors were going to give it back because they started having some stupid turnovers at the end of the game. And again, questionable calls at different points from both teams, right? Both sides. But overall, the Warriors kind of showed why, it's hard to pick Memphis in a serious game like this, even though, again, shout out to the Grizzlies guys, John Morant and Desmond Bane. Gave them all you could really ask for, right? Desmond Bane at 35 of 8 from 3. Warriors couldn't really do much once he got it going because he didn't really do much early in the game. But, just not enough veteran guys. Also, we know that Memphis was without, they don't have any defense really. I mean, again, they made it tough at points, but no Jalen Wells, right? We knew he was out anyways. He's like the only real wing that you could kind of ask to maybe play some staple of defense. Instead, it's Scottie Pippen Jr., who, again, did what he could, but just the lack of size is kind of an issue there. And then, no Brandon Clark. So you can't really play small except for having Jaren Jackson Jr. at the 5. And he's just not quite forceful enough, to make that work 100% of the time. They missed those two guys, but, it is what it is. But I don't think most people expected the Grizzlies to win this game. But they fought hard, but the Warriors kind of showed why, they're going to be a tough out again. And now they move on to face the Rockets. I think we expect them to win that series, but I do think the Rockets could provide physically some problems. We know that they can struggle against more physical, athletic teams. The last time they played, they kind of ran away with it against Golden State. It's an older team, so we know there's going to be nights where they're going to run out of gas and just not have enough. And Jimmy showed up, right? And that's kind of what you needed. He had 18 free throws, shot 12 of 18, 6 rebounds, 7 assists, which was good to see because he had kind of had a stretch where he was kind of quiet offensively for them, clearly trying to pace himself, but him showing up in this game was huge. I think the key for them is, are you going to get the contributions from the other guys? Because, Pod stunk in this game. Offensively at least. Draymond was really good defensively, right? He didn't score, right? He had 4 points, but he had 10 assists, 3 steals, a block. He did foul out, but again, it's a big Memphis front line. Moses Moody gave him some good minutes, and then Quentin Post off the bench, and that's a guy that kind of needs to be good, I think, ideally for them, because he's a stretch 5. He's one of their only bigs off the bench that can actually hit a jump shot beyond 10 feet.
Yeah.
And if he hits shots like he did tonight, then that can help them, and that can allow them to at least have some type of 7-footer out there. Whereas if not, right, like say against the Clippers, it's a big difference. And that's kind of the difference is when you watch them against the Clippers, a guy like Zubac can dominate against this team because, you can give him the ball around the basket and he can kind of just do whatever he wants, right? But a guy like Edey or Jaren Jackson Jr., they're just not quite physical enough. And that's kind of what you have to do against a team like that. And again, Memphis, they had a shot, but the lack of experience, kind of reared its ugly head. The 5-second call at the end of the game where they had a chance to kind of tie it up. And they had plenty of other opportunities to win the game as well. But, this is kind of the argument for Golden State is the veteran experience. But I do think ideally being in the play-in is still not ideal. I know they're going to play the Rockets, which is, a much better first-round matchup, and they treated it like a do-or-die game. But I do think you're still going to have to worry about some fatigue issues with that team. And Kuminga clearly is out of the rotation now. Like, this was another do-or-die game, because if they don't win this game, then you're probably done. Even if you win the 9-10 game, you're not beating OKC in the first round. So he clearly doesn't factor in at all. So they're going to have to find some other ways to be effective, because that makes them a less athletic team.
Yeah, another Kuminga DNP is kind of wild, I think. But, overall, kind of a recipe for success kind of game for them. Jimmy and Curry pop off. They're kind of mauling the Grizzlies at times defensively, especially in the first half. I was very impressed with this team and how they looked in the first half, and that's where I think you do have to credit the Grizzlies. They're not like, just some pushover. They didn't, go down without a fight, because they did come back, and almost win the game and steal it. But, regardless, I think the Steph factor, the Jimmy factor, it's going to be a lot, to overcome potentially for Houston. But I know, your prediction for this series is what, Warriors in 5 or 6?
Yeah, I had 6, and we just got a comment from Keith Wells, Warriors in 6. I think that's what it's going to be. I think Houston can win that series, but I do think the lack of experience is going to be a problem. But again, they have, I think, better defensive guys to be able to at least try to slow down what Golden State can do offensively. I mean, when you watch Memphis and it's like Zach Edey trying to guard in space,
Yeah.
combined with like Santi Aldama
Yeah.
and Luke Kennard and Jaren, it's just not like a lot of high-level defensive guys. And again, they gave it their best, but they just didn't have enough. And then when they go small, they can't get rebounds.
Yep.
Whereas I think Houston can. And I think, that's going to be a potential problem for Golden State. But I think they'll probably win out. But I do think because it's an older team, I don't think it'll be a quick series. I think for Golden State, they're going to have to, give it their best shot, because I think Houston's a team that's not going to quit. They're going to be able to match their physicality, and they got a ton of athletes, and that's the type of formula to be able to beat a team like Golden State, I think.
I'm picking Houston in 7.
You're picking Houston in 7?
Yeah, I'm gonna just zag,
All
really.
right, so I want to hear. So make the case, because I think you can make a case for Houston winning the series, but for me, it's something that I just don't feel like is gonna happen. But make the case.
It's a hot take for sure. It kind of goes back to what you were talking about. Defensively, they have, some monsters on that team. Tari Eason, you have Amen Thompson. I think they're going to probably find a way to make Curry not a non-factor, but they're going to make it very difficult, much more difficult than we just saw with the Grizzlies. And, that's kind of like, I don't know how to explain it. It's more so like, you look at Curry and he's not the kind of guy that's easily taken out of a game. So it's going to be a very tall task, but I think they have the defensive personnel to make this team uncomfortable. And I think that's going to be the key, is to make a team that's kind of on the fence of being like a playoff team this year. And it's like, well, you just came out of the play-in. You're kind of hobbling. Let's take them out right here, right now. I know with the Houston Rockets and their roster offensively is where I think they're probably going to struggle, because they don't necessarily have that superstar talent where we know he's a certified, bona fide closer. But I think it could be somewhat of a coming out party for maybe Alperen Sengun or Jalen Green. But I think athleticism, transitioning into defense is going to be the key for success here. They also have an interesting lineup that I know people have been talking about recently, is, the addition of Steven Adams into the starting lineup, or, at times playing Steven Adams alongside with Alperen Sengun, and it kind of overloads the paint. Then you have a backdoor cutter with Amen Thompson, who can pretty much just dunk it from as long as he's in the paint. And I think they have some experience on the team, like Fred VanVleet. I know he's not like a superstar or anything like that, but the veterans aren't horrible either. They've been in big game scenarios like this, and I think there's a possibility. I know they're definitely not the favorite at all, and they do have a target on their back, being the number 2 seed and not having that extreme playoff experience. But I think there is room for an upset here, because if you're able to take Steph out of the game for maybe 2 games out of a 7-game series, I think there is a pathway for you to win this. I think the X factor is going to be Jimmy Butler for the Warriors, obviously. And what does he look like paired with Steph, in a 7-game series? We just saw it with 1 game. And, like you talked about with the Warriors, what do the other guys contribute? Do you get a legacy game from Pods out of nowhere? Or, we already said Kuminga's done. Who else is going to contribute? And I think that's where I'm intrigued with the Houston Rockets, because they're sneaky deep. That's kind of what I think it comes down to, is depth, youth, and athleticism, and defense.
Yeah, there's a path, there's a roadmap there. I just think it's going to be difficult, because you're going to have to ask somebody on Houston to play up a level that we just don't really know if they're going to be capable of in a playoff setting. It's the first time for a lot of those guys, and I think that's where it's going to be tough. I think it's more so like, I think, a clash of styles, where I think if you're Houston, you're hoping to make it ugly, make it low scoring,
Old school,
make it tough on all those guys, and just kind of wear them down at the end of the, close to the end of the series. Like, if it's a scenario where, I don't know, Houston's up like, 3-2, they're probably going to lose that series, right? Because they'll probably lose game 6 and then game 7. But if they go up like, I don't know, 3-1,
that's what I'm thinking,
right? Maybe, but then you said it's got to go 7. So I mean, like, the problem is that, and then also they do have home court, but we know regular season matchup wise, Golden State has beaten them 3 out of the 5 times I think they played. Yes. Most of them were before the trade. I think there were a couple of games where Steph and Draymond didn't play, so we don't have like a lot of I guess we don't have like a lot of tape on what these two teams look like against one another. And then even with Houston, they didn't make any trades, but say like Amen Thompson was a bench guy earlier in the season, and now he starts And he's played great.
Yeah.
So,
The,
like you said,
the
it's a coming out
in-season
party.
progression of that team, I've been thoroughly impressed with, and they're very good at home. That just an addition.
Yeah. So I guess the question would be, okay, who's the guy that you're looking at on Houston that if you're going to go with Houston in 7, who do you think is going to be the best player in the series for Houston?
Yeah, that's going to be the question of the day. I think it comes down to Şengün or Jalen Green. I would probably say it's going to be Şengün. I think, numbers wise during the regular season, he had better numbers than Jalen Green, but I think he's going to be a potential interior force. I want him to replicate what the Clippers did with Zubac along with Steven Adams. I really want them to overload the paint and play some old school basketball. That's kind of, I don't want them to fall into the trap of attempting too many threes and trying to outshoot the Warriors, because we already know that's not going to happen. You need to get stops and get quick twos. That's kind of, I think, the recipe for success here. Curry and Butler will average a combined 50. That's interesting. I mean, that could happen. I think that could happen. I don't know if that happens during this series though, because I feel like this team is really good defensively. I don't know.
I don't think it'll be a high scoring series. I think for Houston, what they're gonna try to use guys like Amen Thompson to try to basically take Steph out of the game and force it to be a scenario where it's the role players that beat him.
Yep.
And Steph is still gonna hit shots. He's still gonna score.
Yep.
It's just a matter of you still need the role players to show up, because the thing about Golden State is they do have a lot of guys that can't shoot, that nobody guards, and that might be a problem against a team like Houston, which isn't a good shooting team either. But but you're gonna have to find ways for those guys to contribute. And their best defensive lineups, right, tend to be 2-3 non-shooters. So this is probably gonna have to be a series where, honestly, if Golden State were to win, it might just be like it doesn't matter, and Steph and Jimmy kind of just do their thing, and then maybe you get 2 other guys offensively. So which guys would you be looking at for Golden State outside of Steph and Jimmy? Because I don't think those 2 guys just by themselves can win this series, because Houston's deep. I think they need at least a couple other guys. So which guys would you be looking at?
I'm looking at Pods. I think that's probably my number one guy. You kind of look at him and, weird season, better as of late. But I think he needs to be a major positive for this team, and even on both ends of the floor, like, I think the Warriors, if they win the series, I don't even think they're really going to win it because of offense. I think they're probably going to win it because of defense. They're a very good defensive team alongside the Rockets, whereas, they're not a good offensive team. So, but yeah, I'm probably looking at Pods because of his, effect on both ends of the floor. I mean, that's the problem with the Warriors that I do have, is they don't really have a guy outside of those 2 where I feel super confident about, that. You know what I mean?
Right. I think the thing is, I don't think it'll hurt them against Houston. I think it'll hurt them against a better team. Like, this is why they needed to win this game, because if they play OKC, I don't think you'd be able to get out of that alive, especially because I think they can match up a little bit better. But, against Houston, which doesn't have, like, Keith Wells said in the comments, no superstar, I think they should win this series. Like, if they don't win this series, I think that would probably, be, I think, a disappointment for Golden State. I mean, Houston's been great all year, but even with that, Golden State's still only a few games behind them.
Yep.
It's just, again, the question is, like we saw with a couple of the other teams, like, say, LA a couple of years ago. I guess you could make the case for Miami a couple of years ago too, because those teams had to work so hard to get to where they were by the end of the season. I don't know if they'll be able to get out of the conference, but they should be able to win a first round series, right? I would say at least.
They're the odds-on favorite. They have to.
Yeah, because if they don't, I think that's going to have to probably ask some questions about, we're going to have to do more. But I think it's still tough, because we know that it's difficult to pull off a midseason trade and, do, a super, super deep run, because we haven't seen a team be able to win a title. But they're clearly better, right? It's just, the question is I think we were waiting to see Jimmy Butler show up, and he has in the last couple of games. Didn't help him against the Clippers. I mean, he did, but, like, it wasn't enough for them to win. But this game it was. So I think Houston's not a pushover, but I got to pick Golden State to win this series, and I'm probably going to say 6. But if Houston won, I wouldn't be, shocked, I guess, just because I could see a scenario where they just make it super low scoring, and some of the guys on Golden State have a bad series. Like, you could see a scenario where, hey, Pods has a horrible series, or Moses Moody doesn't knock down his shots. I mean, that's kind of what it comes down to, right? Like you said, if Golden State contains Houston offensively, and then Houston just kind of looks rough, turns the ball over a lot, they're going to win the series.
Yeah.
But if Houston's young guys just kind of have a coming out party and then they just kind of blow up and Jalen Green and Şengün and Amen Thompson just are kind of too much, then they're going to win the series. But I think you still have to favor Golden State.
Yeah. What do you think of do you think Udoka is going to be a potential X factor or not really? Do you think cuz normally when we do see, a young team like this who does get a higher seeding, they normally do have a coach that doesn't have the experience alongside the players, but I think since Udoka has been here before, that might also play a factor into it. And granted, you're going up against Steve Kerr too, so
I think it can make a difference, at least from the perspective of, unlike, say, Memphis, it feels like Udoka's given the Rockets an identity, right? Where they're a super tough, super physical team. He did that in Boston, right? Where Boston kind of had a reputation for being kind of a pushover team, right? Kind of a soft team. And he turned them into a team that was super physical, super tough, right? They weren't able to get it done the first time against Golden State, but they were also younger. But in the case of Houston, that's kind of been the case for them this season, right? Is that they've taken on the identity of the coach. They've become a more serious team, right? They've kind of become, I think, what Memphis had continued to aspire to be, right? Where it's a team, with a solid identity, with a solid young core, but they also, like you said, unlike Memphis, do have some KG experienced veterans. It's just the problem is again, can I trust, Fred VanVleet, say it's like a tie game, with a minute to go? Can I trust that he's going to hit a big shot, versus what Golden State has on the other end? That's the part that's tough. And I don't know, I don't know how much Udoka can really do with that. But I think at least for him, the advantage he'll have is if a guy plays like garbage, they won't close, right? We know that he's not married to any of the guys on the roster. We're and that's part of what happens when you don't have any superstars, right? Where he's okay with taking a guy out of the game if he's not playing well and not closing. But if it's one of the key contributors, that's kind of a problem because you need those guys to be good. I think it'd be hard for me to envision a scenario where Jalen Green is benched, in the last 5 minutes of the game and the Rockets still find a way to win, unless he's just so horrible that he's just tanking the team's odds, right? Where with Golden State, they pretty much have a set closing lineup that they go with, right? Sometimes you may not like some of the guys they close with or, choose to play down the stretch, but they have at least a consistent group of guys that I think they feel relatively comfortable with.
yeah.
Whereas with Houston, it's dependent on the scenario of the game. So, but I think he could be a factor just because, again, he's clearly a tough-minded physical dude that's, comfortable with mixing things up and getting into it with the other team stars, right? And if you're Houston, you need that, right? Because they didn't have that, before he came to Houston. So now they at least have that type of identity. And that's where I think it can be a tough matchup physically for Golden State. But I think talent-wise, Golden State should be able to win out. But, Houston in 7, if it happens, it wouldn't surprise me because Houston has been sneakily really, really good for the last couple of months as well, right? They've been just as good as Golden State has been the last couple of months.
Yep.
It's just obviously for them, it wasn't really a trade. It was just the progression of some of their young guys playing a lot better, and then that kind of changes the outlook of the team, right? Because what Amen Thompson was doing the second half of the season, he wasn't doing as much the first half of the season. And it wasn't like he was bad. He just was coming off the bench and playing, a different role. But now he's starting. So it's an interesting clash of styles. I just, again, like a lot of series, 3-point shooting plays a big factor here. Because like I said, if Golden State can get away with putting a bunch of non-shooters out there and defending and getting stops and just letting Steph and Jimmy cook, then they can probably win it out. Whereas if Houston shuts that down and, forces turnovers, because that's the other key thing, right? If you look at this Memphis game, right, Steph only had 1 turnover, right? But in the Clippers matchup, he had 8, right? And, close to half of them came in the waning stretches of the fourth quarter and in the overtime, right? So if Houston can do things like that and make Golden State more uncomfortable, then that's where they could pull it off. It's just, I don't know. I can't say I can't see it, but it's just, it's kind of hard for me to go against Golden State. But like I said, I give Houston a shot. It's just, it could happen. I just don't know I just don't think it will.
Yeah, I 100%, I'm with you in terms of, it's not super likely, hence why it's a hot take, but, I don't know. I have a good feeling about that identity. There's something that I really love about it, and the fact that they're being talked down on, by pretty much everybody, in the NBA community. It's just giving me a good feeling about him.
Yeah, and it looks like the spread, they're like minus 250 to win the series. So that's
Yep.
pretty significant.
Yep.
So,
Yes, sir.
and like I said with the other series, I mean, like I said, I just think the Celtics will just kind of run Orlando out of there.
I
Like I
agree.
said, I could see them getting the game just because you always give a team a game just because now at the 3-point shot, somebody could get hot. But I don't think Orlando has much of a chance. But maybe they batter them around and make it tough for them offensively. But I don't know.
I would say Celtics in 4.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the
Now
sweep.
we got two. Now we can mention the 9-10 playing games,
Oh boy.
right? And just talk a little bit about those going forward. Those will happen, I guess, Tuesday night, 7:30, 10 o'clock. Miami, Chicago for the East. Dallas, Sacramento for the West. Whoever wins that game, well, I guess the winner of the Chicago Miami game will play Atlanta. Winner of Sacramento Dallas will play Memphis, and the losers are done. Their season's over. So we talked about the Miami Chicago game. What is your expectation for that one? Because, those are two teams that are probably might be a little bit tougher to figure out. I guess Miami's got more experience, but, Chicago has some good young talent too.
Yeah, I'm taking the young talent on this one. Chicago. I think they have a solid core. They've been one of the better, more hot teams. I think as of late in terms of the last month or so. Kind of squeezing out some unlikely wins. I think there were a lot of doubters of the squad, and rightfully so. They're young. They don't have a super experienced roster, but I think there are some interesting X factors within this team. You look at Mataz Buzelis, he's been playing pretty well. You look at Kobe White, I think you kind of have to start there because I think he has the potential to pop off, especially since, I'm not huge on what Miami brings to the table without a Jimmy Butler. I think the Tyler Hero success is pretty warranted, but, outside of that, it's like that's kind of what the season amounts for them to me. I don't know. It's just kind of I'm not too high on Miami. I think Chicago has a lot of momentum. And I think they have a lot of pieces that can probably just, are likely to pop off in a 1-game scenario because we're not talking about a 7-game series here. If it was a 7-game series, I would definitely take Miami. But 1 game, I think I have a little bit more faith in, Kobe White and the Chicago Bulls.
Yeah, I'd probably say so too. You look at what Miami, I guess, was
And
able
Josh
to
Giddey.
do. Yeah, to close out the season. They went 6-4, right?
Yeah.
But the Bulls also went 7-3,
Mm-hmm.
and ended the season on a 3-game winning streak. And I mean, right at the end of the regular season, some of that doesn't matter for some of those teams, but it feels like the Bulls have been the better team for the last, I don't know what, month and a half or so, right?
Yeah.
Like, because the Heat had a stretch where they were reeling. It's tough. It just feels like down the stretch of games, they just can't get anything going on the offensive end.
Yeah.
And unless they just get super hot, which could happen in a playing game, I feel like the Bulls might just be able to. I could see a guy like a Kobe White, or like you said, a Josh Giddey having a big game, or even like a Vucevic or somebody like that.
They feel
But
a little bit more complete too. Like, if you
Mhm.
look at the roster, it's like, I mean, I could see it, being like an 8th seed or something like that, but I don't know, because like you look at Miami, it's kind of a weird hodgepodge of guys. Some who I think work in theory, but they're just missing that extra piece.
Mhm. And then would either one give Atlanta? Could either one beat Atlanta? I guess.
Maybe Chicago, but I
Mhm.
feel like having a guy like Trae Young, if he's not tossed, I think that kind of helps the Hawks case. You have Dyson Daniels as well.
Mhm.
The Jalen Johnson injury is really just what's mainly holding back
Yeah.
that team in all
Yep.
reality. But
Because it makes them so much worse on defense, where they
yeah,
just can't stop anybody.
it's
And
bad.
yeah, so it could get ugly, but we don't have to think about that until after the 9-10
Yes,
games, and
sir.
then out west, Kings, Mavs. I
Um,
think we took Kings.
yeah, I took the
Yeah,
Kings. You took the
but it
Kings.
wouldn't be. I wouldn't be completely shocked if the Mavs won. My only concern is just, are they going to be able to score? And the Kings have two guys who could just, who can get hot. Zach LaVine could go off for 40. DeRozan could go off for 30 something, and then that just kind of puts them away. I mean, AD of course could have a great game, but I don't know. I just would probably bank on the Kings offensively being able to kind of find something, even though Dallas, has a lot of size and athleticism at different spots. But I don't know. Like, which team feels like they might be more okay with going home? It feels like it's probably the Mavs. I mean,
Yeah.
just given the consistent reporting, even the stuff about what the CEO for the Mavs comparing the Luka trade to what was it like Monte Ellis and Andrew Bogut.
Yeah. I it the plot somehow got worse with that thing, but yeah, I'm
Yeah.
taking the Kings for sure. It's like you said, you got two guys that are very capable scorers. Granted,
Mhm.
you do have to credit the Mavs and their defensive identity. You love it night in, night out, the energy and effort that those guys bring. But like you said, offensively, who's going to be their creator, their distributor? I don't really see anybody on this roster being able to do that, especially
Right.
even at like a somewhat acceptable play-in level. You know what I mean? To get out of the play-in, I don't think they have that on the roster. So that's where I
Right.
think I have to give the edge to Sacramento because in this case, they've got some spark plugs too, like Malik Monk, Keegan Murray. These are guys that can pop off. Valanciunas, like we've seen these guys kind of have some interesting games throughout the regular season. So it wouldn't surprise me if one of them, like you said, puts up like 40 or 30.
Yeah, I agree. And then I guess you want to briefly get into some of the other playoff matchups, I suppose.
Sure.
All right, so then we also, I guess we'll start with the East. I guess
Mm.
we have Pacers, Bucks, Knicks, Pistons. Right, I think both of us for those series, I think we're leaning towards Bucks just because of Giannis.
Yes.
But obviously, with Dame probably being out for at least a game, because we know he's out for at least a game, and that was kind of the X factor there. I think if he can't play, it might go long. Right, from the perspective of how much will the Bucks be able to get done offensively without Dame? Right, can they have guys that can come in and somewhat replace it? Compared to the Pacers, right, who have a ton of depth and have a ton of different ways to score. It might be tough, but we also have not seen a playoff matchup between these two teams with Giannis involved because he didn't play it all last year, and he individually closed the season out on a strong note and carried the team like to what, a 6-7 game winning streak. I know they didn't play a ton of great teams, but they did get some good wins, like against Minnesota, who had to win. Who was kind of in a game that they wanted to win. So I could see Giannis having a dominant stat line, but again, it's another series where, like I said, I'll probably pick the Bucks, but again, wouldn't shock me if the Pacers won.
Yeah, I'm picking the Bucks as well. I
Yeah.
think with this whole scenario, and it's no disrespect to Indiana because I think they 100% have the personnel to win this series and matchup. Because I mean, you look at what Tyrese Halliburton has done. He's returned to form. Siakam, one of the most underrated do-it-all guys, well-rounded player in the NBA, is awesome. But I think that Giannis factor is going to be way too overwhelming. You know what I mean? Where now we're seeing a version of him that we haven't seen in a long time, if ever. He's having a great career year in terms of doing it all, being somewhat of a point forward, which is pretty cool. Found the mid range, has really honed in on that, and I think his playmaking creation for others, and himself is just. I think it's going to be a little bit too overwhelming for the Pacers, but hey, the Pacers are not a bad team at all, so it's not a
Right.
slight to them. It's
Yeah.
more so a testament to Giannis's greatness.
Right. This is one of those scenarios where it's the Pacers are probably the better team, but the Bucks have the best player, and so I can see a scenario where Giannis just kind of is too overwhelming and just kind of just runs roughshod over Indiana.
Agreed.
Then we got Knicks Pistons. This is another series that I think should probably be pretty entertaining. I mean, again, you have a pretty young and up and coming Pistons team with Cade Cunningham, who's going to be an All NBA guy, and going against the Knicks, right, with Brunson and Towns and all the other guys on that roster. This is another one where I feel like, again, I think the Knicks I think the Knicks have the best player in the series. I mean, Brunson and Cade, it's close, but I think Brunson, when he's healthy and on his game, I think is better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the Knicks team is better. I think the Pistons can give them a fight, right? So I could see them getting a win or two, but I think two is probably the ceiling. I'd be a little surprised if the Knicks lost this series. Like, I think it'll be tough, maybe physical, but I just think the Knicks offensively, if they can get it going, think that is probably going to be a little bit too much for the Pistons to overcome. And there's some guys on the Pistons where you just have a little bit of some question marks about, like, hey, some of these guys have never been in a playoff series. They do have some vets on the roster. But what does it look like? And I think for the Knicks, I think that's the safer bet. And I would be a little surprised if the Knicks lost this series. So I'd say Knicks in 6.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be a challenge, I think, for the Knicks, though. I don't think it's going to be,
Sure.
a walk in the park at all. But it kind of goes back to what you were saying. There's a lot of unproven, guys on this Pistons team. Being the 6th seed, being so young, you are led by a dog and Cade Cunningham, but
Mhm.
that's about it. If you want me to be realistic, I don't really foresee anybody else have like popping off. Like it wouldn't surprise me if Cade, kind of pops off, but what are the other guys going to do, right? And I think that should be the Knicks strategy is like, go after Cade, take him out of the game. And if we're going to lose these games, I want to
Mhm.
lose it to, I don't know, like freaking Malik Beasley or Tobias Harris. Like I want to lose it to those guys, not Cade
Mhm.
Cunningham going off and averaging 40 in his
Right.
first series. Absolutely not. So
Yeah.
I think that's going to be
The
the strategy. Like the Knicks are probably
Yeah.
going to throw all their defensive personnel at Cade, which is smart, but it's still going to be a challenge.
Yeah, because he's a big guard and he can play, in the pick and
Yeah,
roll. Towns, can he slow that down? We'll see. And that's the thing is I feel like Cade can have a big series in this one, but I don't know if I can just bank on the other Pistons guys being good as well. I think
exactly.
it's gonna have to be a scenario where, like you said, Cade's gonna have to be special, but a lot of guys for Detroit are gonna have to play well too. And like I said, I think it might be tough. It'll be physical. I'm sure there'll be, some brawls or whatever, right? Because the Pistons have shown that identity this year.
Yes, sir.
I just think the Knicks are the more talented team, and I just think that by and large, I think that's gonna be the deciding factor in the series. And as long as Brunson shows up and Towns and OG and everybody else plays to the level that we've seen them play for most of the season, they should win.
I agree.
Then we move on over to the West, right, where we have a couple of series that have been set for a little bit, right? We got Nuggets Clippers, right? Both of these teams, have the same record, but the Clippers have been on the upward trend the latter part of the season, whereas the Nuggets have been a little bit on a downward trend, right? They did close the season out winning winning their last 3 games after firing Michael Malone, right? But the Clippers have been playing really, really well to close out the season. And you look at the way Kawhi's been playing since he's come back from injury. Harden has been playing really well all season. Zubac has been great. I mean, the last couple months he's been basically giving you 20 and 20
Yeah,
almost in every other game. So they feel like that they're the team right now that's probably the more likely to win. It's just right now I think this one is a 7-game series, and I'm gonna lean Denver in 7. It would not shock me if the Clippers won it in 7. I'd be surprised if it was a quick series. I do think I can understand why you wouldn't pick the Nuggets from the perspective of they just fired their coach. So how is that going to work? And then they're not very deep. They haven't been good defensively all year, right? And it's really only gotten worse for the most part since during the latter part of the season. But they do still have Jokic. If Jamal Murray is healthy, right? I think that's kind of the deciding factor in that series, right? Gordon, can his 3-point shooting keep up? Can any of the young players for Denver help at least somewhat, right? Besides Christian Brown, can you get anything from, I don't know, Jalen Pickett or I guess, Peyton Watson? Can they
right.
do anything on either end of the floor?
Hmm.
But again, for the Clippers, if Kawhi plays at the level he's been playing, along with Harden and Powell and all those other guys, they can definitely pull off a series win too. So I think whoever wins it, I think it'll be in 7, and I think it'll be hard fought. But I'm gonna lean the Nuggets. I think they can still win, a playoff series. Again, it's a tough matchup because I do think defensively, are they going to be able to slow down the Clipper guards? Probably not. Do they have an answer for Kawhi? Probably not, other than maybe Aaron Gordon. I mean, even Zubac, right, can kind of he's not going to match Jokic's production, obviously, but he's a guy that Jokic at least has to guard. You can't necessarily just kind of, he's not like a Zach Edey or a Jaren Jackson Jr. Zubac can be a lot more physical. He's got a lot more size and he's got great touch too. So I think, the Clippers, big 3, I guess, or 4, whatever you want to call it, against the Nuggets, core 4, 5 guys, right? Which one do you think is better? And then, which one do you probably expect to pull it out? Nuggets will have home court, but I think the Clippers can take it. So, this one is a tough one, but I'm going to lean Nuggets in 7.
Yeah, talk about a toss up, But I think you do have to look at track record here. Granted, a lot of people, including us, pretty much crapped all over the Clippers. We thought they were cooked. We thought they were about to be buns, but here they are. They're pretty good. So, I think you do have to look at what they do have, but also the track record, the history, right? Does Kawhi play the full series? Does Harden show up in the full series? Things like that kind of are just, they can't get that stench away from them. They have a stink on them, in my opinion, when it comes to playoffs, And that's where I'm like, I just can't do it. Whereas I've seen the Nuggets win a title, granted, not the same personnel, but you still have Jokic, you still have Jamal Murray. If Jamal Murray finds a way to pop off alongside Jokic having a good series, which we know he will, I think it's going to be the Nuggets. Granted, like you said, it's a toss-up. It's going to go 7 games. It has to. There's no other way around it. And I think it's going to be a very underrated peak series because I think night in, night out, we're going to see some crazy performances from both sides, hopefully, But, yeah, at the end of the day, I completely understand anybody who would pick the Clippers. I think that is a completely valid take, but I'm picking the Nuggets in 7.
Yeah. And then last but not least, we have Lakers Wolves, right? The 3-6 matchup. Of course, we know Lakers, they went through a big change this season, right? Obviously, they pulled off the Luka trade. And then the Wolves obviously made their big move in the offseason, right? Just trading Cat for Randall and DiVincenzo. Pretty wild season for both of these teams, right? In the case of the Wolves, they struggled for most of the early portion of the season, even while being healthy. Then they had a stretch where they had a bunch of injuries, and they actually were able to kind of get things under control. Some of the guys started playing better. Then their full group came back. Then eventually they started picking it up and they started improving their play. Had a couple of bad losses, but by and large closed the season very well. Obviously, the good constant for them is Anthony Edwards, right? Where he basically had the best season of his career, right? He gave him 28, 6, and 5, shot 40% from 3, 10 attempts a game. So we know he's pretty much expanded his offensive game. His playmaking has improved. Again, it's not amongst the elite of guards in the NBA, but it has gotten better. And a lot of the other guys, like Randall had a really good year, second half of the season especially. DiVincenzo, second half of the year, much better. Naz Reid played pretty well. Nickeil Alexander-Walker. So a deep team, ton of size, as we know, right? Because, there's a couple of guys, but most of the rest of the roster is intact. And then obviously you have the Lakers, right? The new look Lakers with Luka. With LeBron, now the emergence of Austin Reeves, Rui Hachimura, Dorian Finney-Smith, Gabe Vincent. So, with this series, two very different teams, right? With the Wolves, it's a very big, more traditional team, whereas with the Lakers, it's a smaller team. They do have a lot of bigger guys, right? Physical guys, so it's not like your typical small ball team. But, I think this one is kind of an interesting one to watch, too, because of the differences between the two teams. I think for this one, I would probably lean LA. I don't think it'll be a cakewalk series. I think, it'll probably go 6. Maybe it might go 7 because I do think there's a way for the Wolves to pull this off. I think some of it's going to have to come down to for Minnesota. Obviously, Edwards, right? Is he going to be able to put up his usual production? Jaden McDaniels, right? Are his shots going to, get knocked down? Can he make those shots? Because we know sometimes his offense can kind of come and go. DiVincenzo, Gobert, can he stay on the floor? Because we know they're going to target him. And then obviously, the other bench guys like Naz Reid, Nickeil Alexander-Walker. That's the key for them, right? Because offensively, they've been top 10 both ends of the floor. And they shoot the ball really well too to go along with the size. It's just a matter of at the end of games, right? Do they have enough to be able to slow down what the Lakers can pull off at the end of games where they have 3 guys offensively that can get you off the dribble and kind of create whatever shots they want and create shots for others as well. So that might be a little bit tough for the Wolves to match. But again, defensively, they could cause some problems. Can they get extra possessions and offensive rebounds? Can they force the Lakers into turnovers? So there's ways for the Wolves to be able to pull it out. But I think the Lakers, the higher end talent, I think is just better. And I think also, like, if it comes to, a situation where you got to make some quick decisions, quick reads, I think I would probably trust LA in that spot with the personnel they have. And, if the Wolves make some mistakes late in the game, because Conley, he's been better the latter part of the season, but he is an older guy. We know he's a guy that's going to get targeted as well. So if he either can't close games or if he's just not playing that well, you may have to close with another guy. And then you don't really have another secondary guy next to Ant. I guess it could be Randall because we know obviously he's their second best player, and he's a guy that does have some physical advantages against a lot of teams. And it's funny because he's not really been a guy who's put up good numbers in the postseason, but he's played very well career-wise against LA. So could this be some type of revenge series? How far does he go into that? Does he kind of go too hard into it from the perspective of it kind of takes Minnesota out of their offense? I don't know, but I just trust the higher end talent on the Lakers more, and I think that they're probably the more likely team to win. But I do think Minnesota could win, but I'm gonna go Lakers in 6.
Yeah, Rockets are screwed. This would have been so much fun if it was Golden State versus OKC. Now I won't even tune into any OKC first round matchup. Lakers in 6. Luka versus Rudy round 2. LOL. Yeah. Thank you for all the comments, Untame. I believe you're a return commenter. I think I've seen your name in here before, but yeah, I think you're speaking facts on everything but the Rockets are screwed. Earlier in the live stream, I had a hot take. I think the Rockets will win in 7, but neither here nor there at this point. Lakers in 6. Yeah, I'm going Lakers in 5, pretty much for all the reasons that you mentioned. I think number one is Rudy Gobert. I know you didn't really mention that too much, but they're going to pull him out of the freaking paint, and it's going to be a nightmare for, whichever one wants to take their turn. It's going to be either Luka, it's either going to be Braun, it's either going to be AR. It's just going to be a mess, and I think that is going to hurt the team, and it's not, that's not going to be the only reason,
Right?
Because there are some obvious glaring issues. I think Minnesota will probably run into, I don't know, some problems getting swarmed. I think Ant's decision making might have to be a factor as well, where it's like, is it going to be top tier? Is it going to be more so sporadic, a lot of turnovers? The Julius Randle factor kind of goes back to what I was saying about the Clippers. Bad track record. Not a huge fan on that. Yeah, I was here before. Good to see you guys again in the YouTube channel. I'll resub to you. Appreciate it, bro. But yeah, man, it's like, I don't know how to feel about Minnesota, man. I'm just not too confident after they did, trade Towns. It's like you said, different kind of roster, but I think it's going to be the same end result where it's like the team has a very specific ceiling, and I think this one is significantly lower than the one that we saw last year. And, I get it why it happened, but at the same time, the personnel is just not it. It's not it. And you don't want to face the Lakers in round 1, especially with how hot they've been. And we already know their potential is through the roof because of, what Luka brings on the offensive end. You couple that with LeBron and then AR, I just don't think the Timberwolves stand a shot. Lakers in 5. Not for the meme.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens, right? Because if Gobert's in a scenario where he does get, played off the floor, and then you got to go, a different route with, like, say, Naz Reid, then you could make the case of, well, maybe that gives Ant a little bit more room to work offensively. Agreed. But then obviously you might give up some issues, potentially rebounding and defense-wise, right? So there's kind of a give and, take there. But yeah, I just think, like you said, I think for the Lakers, I think the offensive talent might be a little bit much for Minnesota to overcome. And again, you can't even really use regular season matchups here either because they never really, they played, 4 games this season? But 3 of those games I think were before the trade. 2 of those, I think LeBron didn't even play, right? And then the other factor, and then the last game that they played was post-trade, but then it was a scenario where I think Randall was out, and then in the second half, what was it? Edwards got tossed. Let's see. The only real reason I said 6 is because of Lakers' lack of defense and the Naz Rudy factor. Don't forget centers beat Jokic last season. So, yeah, and that's the question for the Lakers defensively is that small ball lineup going to work? Right? Where are they going to be able to keep Minnesota off the boards? And then are they going to be able to knock down those open shots, right? Because the other role players are going to be a factor too, right? If guys like Dorian Finney-Smith and Gabe Vincent can't knock down the open shots they get, then you're going to have a problem, right? Because then Minnesota's probably more than likely going to get the rebound, and they're probably going to get out in transition, and that might be an issue. But if they do knock them down, then that's going to be a real problem for Minnesota because then you have to find ways to match that offensively. And
and you've got Luka who can generate those looks automatically for those guys. So
exactly. And then for a guy like a Jackson Hayes, can he be playable at all in this series? Because, you're going to have a guy probably that at least can be a threat where it's like, okay, Gobert can't just stand in the paint and do whatever. Because we saw with Minnesota or with Dallas, right, where Gobert was kind of just stuck in the mud, having to try to break up the lobs that Dallas was getting with their bigs.
And also low key, like Derek Lively was so crucial to that too, where it's like he wasn't just the guy that was like a finisher. He was honestly one of the better passers, and like he also generated a lot of corner looks for those guys.
Yeah, because Jax is not enough. If anything, DFS got to play some center. I don't trust Len.
Nobody
trusts Alex.
No. That's when we know we're cooked. If Alex Len is playing, heck no.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, he will probably not play at all unless it's a scenario where like the series is over and it's garbage time. You know what I mean? Like he will not get actual minutes. He's just like on the team. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like he's not
filler,
a guy that's
bro.
gonna get. Yeah, he's not a guy that's gonna get any real minutes, right? Yeah. It's basically Jackson Hayes is your only true center, and then after that, it's like Rui, LeBron, DFS, and that's pretty much it, right? Like they run small for most of that, and that's it because none of the other bigs are playable.
Yeah, I just don't think Jackson.
Is the only other one. Huh?
I just don't think Jackson Hayes has the passing capabilities to do what you need to do against Rudy Gobert. Like, is he really going to make the extra swing to the corner or, delay a pass to a cutter? I don't think so. He's not Derek Lively, unfortunately.
Yeah, because sometimes he can do it. But again, in a playoff series, we haven't seen that. Right. So we don't know what that's going to look like, So we'll see what happens there. But I mean, the Lakers' best lineups have mostly been, I think, when they go smaller, right? When it's like, the starting group, but I think you take out Jackson Hayes with like DFS. I think that's, pretty much their best lineup.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So, I guess, if you want to mention any of the other NBA stuff that occurred, right? If you want to talk about that, before we probably close it out.
I mean, what happened? Phoenix fired their head coach.
Yeah, exactly. With Budenholzer getting fired, and then what was it, David Griffin getting fired and being replaced with Joe Dumars.
Yeah, interesting stuff. I mean, no, I'm serious. Like I'm saying that. I know it sounded like I was being sarcastic, but I mean, that's kind of the first domino to fall in Phoenix, I would assume. Mm-hmm. I think we all know what's coming next. Somebody is getting moved, and I think the only guy that is potentially even flexible enough to move is probably going to be KD. I don't believe the noise about Book being traded, not in the offseason. I just don't think that's going to happen. Beal is pretty much unmovable, and then the whole quote earlier today about his wrestling with Bud and talking about don't ever compare me or don't ever tell me to play like another player is making me lose my mind.
But specifically Drew Holiday, who's a 2-time champion.
Exactly. And it's like, yeah, like he's one of the greatest role players, and he's not even really a role player. He's just a really good player on a really good team that's stacked with talent. Phoenix is a dumpster fire. Where will KD end up? Yeah, exactly. Everybody's been like theory crafting, like, is he going to Houston? Is he going to Memphis? Like, where does he go? That's the problem, because apparently, allegedly, at the trade deadline, the only reason practically the only reason he wasn't moved was because the return wasn't good enough for Phoenix. Well, now you're not going to get nearly what you were probably going to be getting at the deadline, right? And realistically, I don't know what they're going to get back. Do they get back like a first-round pick? Do they get back, like two really good role players in like a first-round pick? Because that's what I'm thinking. Like, I just don't really know what you're going to get, because the return, I feel like, is just going to be mid, and it's not going to be anywhere near what you gave up. You're never going to really recover from that.
Yeah, and the problem is it's got to be like a $50 million return. That's the issue there, or whatever it is, 50, 60 million. I can't remember exactly how much he makes. But that's the problem there, is what team is going to come up with it. I think we probably will get maybe a little bit more of an answer after this postseason.
Agreed.
Because I think, say one of these teams gets eliminated early, like say if Houston loses, because, Untamed just mentioned Houston, the age timeline doesn't match, but it could be interesting. Fred's over there as a vet, maybe send him to Phoenix. I think he's got a team option. Yeah. But like say Houston gets knocked out in the first round.
Yeah.
Say they get waxed in 5.
Yeah.
Maybe Houston then talks itself into the idea of, we need to add a guy like a Kevin Durant, to this roster, and say like a couple of the young guys just kind of stink it up.
Okay.
And they're just kind of like, let's just roll the dice. Right?
Okay.
A scenario like that could happen, right? Or, what other teams are there? I mean,
Well,
What about like Indiana, who has like a bunch of contracts that they could possibly, cobble together or something like
but
that? I know
then
there were a ton of teams that mentioned it, but then you also got to factor in the second apron. Some of these teams that are in the second apron may not be able to pull off moves like that. The Houston one is interesting, but you still have the issue of he is going to go into his 19th season or
hmm
whatever it is,
hmm
so if you don't have to give up much, then that's probably okay. But if you do have to give up a lot, that might be a problem because then you might have a Phoenix type situation. Like, my guess is it might be like a Butler situation where, he ends up going somewhere for like a ton. And
exactly.
then, and then it probably ends up being relatively fine wherever he goes. But there's a lot of teams that have mentioned, even like teams other than Houston, like say, like I think the Spurs were mentioned,
Yes, they were.
as a possible team
But my thing
as
is
well.
the thing that's throwing
Mhm.
me off. Go ahead. Actually, I'll wait.
Yeah, and with the Spurs, they're a younger team, and I don't think they have the apron issues.
Yeah, the thing, even if Houston loses to Golden State, which I strongly believe will happen in 6, if I'm Houston, I'd probably stand pat. Yeah, I agree. There's no point in doing that. I think at the
Yeah,
deadline, for sure, like you have to pull that trigger. But at this point, I think you're probably confident with your core. Give them,
mhm,
a postseason run, see how they do. Exactly like Tari Ahmed, and that's exactly why
yeah,
I'm picking them to win that in 7. But the thing that's throwing me off about the whole KD situation is like, okay, say you get, some solid young players or some solid role players.
mhm,
Book said he's not doing another rebuild. So
right.
if you don't get the return that's good enough, he's probably going to ask out
Which
eventually.
it won't be. Yeah, which it
Exactly.
won't. Yeah.
exactly. So
So,
now you're
and
stuck with
that might
Beal.
be, yeah, and that might be the situation that the Suns are in. And it's like if you just run it back, I mean, are they going to be better? I mean,
No,
like maybe,
no,
but probably not.
no.
So that's kind of the conundrum there. And like he said, like Untamed said, for the Rockets, I think you either stand pat or maybe even go for maybe like another younger star. That's maybe like a little bit closer to not like super young, but maybe somebody like I don't know, 26, 27. Maybe somebody asks out. Who knows, right? I don't know what's going to happen there, but
Don't they have Phoenix's first round pick?
I believe they do. So
yeah, if that
yeah,
thing gets like if they get a top 5 pick,
yeah.
yeah, that team's going to be scary in the next few years, man.
And then who else? And then maybe KD for Trey, like Atlanta, like him going to Atlanta.
I don't think KD would go there. Cuz at the end of the day, I feel like I know he doesn't have like a no trade clause, but I think he has some say in it.
I think
Uh,
yeah, I get what you're saying. Like it's like because of his status
yeah,
and his stature,
exactly.
he'd be like say he could have. I thought that they kind of reported like he was gonna be traded to Golden State, and
Yeah,
then he turned it down.
yeah.
Right.
But how
So
much do
if
you
he had,
believe about that since post
I
Luca?
don't know.
Like post Luca, I'm scared for everybody. I don't know.
I don't know because the thing, yeah, because that's the thing is that like he wasn't even like involved in the trade at all, right?
Yeah,
According to that, right? It was more so
yeah.
like they were trying to make trades and they were like, we can't get Jimmy Butler because we can't trade Beal. So let's see if we could trade KD, which is,
Wow.
interesting. And I guess that's what happened there. And then he didn't want to go to Golden State, for different reasons. But I don't know. It's tough to say, but he's probably one of the first dominoes of the offseason because I
Yep.
mean, could he stay in Phoenix? Maybe, but I mean, like if he does, then it's just because like he's just okay with
Did you see the
where he's
tweets?
at. Which, huh?
Did you see his tweets? Some of them are deleted.
No, I
Yeah,
hadn't seen
he
him.
was going back and forth with Suns fans. He was saying something along the lines of, "Yeah, you guys are talking about me dribbling, 30 times in a possession, but you Suns fans will say anything to get me off your team." And it's like, yeah, he's done. He doesn't want to be there,
Yeah,
bro.
I get that he has to say, but like the teams he mentioned were Miami and who? What was it? It was like I think Minnesota tried to trade for him at the deadline. Again, they're a second apron team, so I don't know how much flexibility they have.
Golden State.
Um, Golden State, I guess, was trying to get him. The Spurs, potentially team people have mentioned Dallas too, which
Yeah,
would be
that's another one.
interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, but again, with no Kyrie for a while, right? How much sense does that make? I mean, what is the package? I don't know. So
It's going to be return
that's kind of
based, and I'm telling you, the return is going to
mhm.
be garbage.
Yeah. Like I said, I think a lot of it will depend on this postseason where if there's a team that goes out early, they'll talk themselves into it. Because, I mean, again, like Jimmy Butler kind of nuked his situation in Miami, but then Golden State talked themselves into him, and look how it's turned out for them. Right now, they at least have a shot. I wouldn't pick them to win it all, but I mean, I think that they at least have a shot. They had no shot prior to that deal.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So, anything else?
I mean, shoot, we're at the hour mark. We talked playing. We talked a little bit of the preview of the next playing games tomorrow. We will be live tomorrow, recapping those games. And then, we talked a little bit about some of the postseason matchups that have been confirmed. We gave pretty much all our takes on who we think is going to win the series. Couple of hot takes. All those teams either can't, and the teams that can are all contenders.
Right.
He's in a tough situation. Exactly.
Exactly. That is the tough.
But he can't run it back though.
Right. Yeah, and that's the point. That's a good point. Just from the perspective of like, it's harder than you think in terms of coming up with a Durant trade that makes sense. Because like he said, and like I said, right, some of those teams are in the second apron. So realistically, can they do that? They would have to like move guys and get under the second apron, but then still have 50 million left over to be able to trade for KD. Maybe you have to have a third team or something where you just dump a contract. Like, Julius Randle, do you just dump him to a third team? But then where you get $50 million, to trade for KD. And then, like you said, the other ones, like the Spurs, I mean, are they a contender if they get Kevin Durant? You think so?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
D-Fox,
I guess because
KD, and Wemby.
All right.
It depends on who's going to be on the team because, do you give up
Right.
Castle, Keldon Johnson, Sohan? I don't know. Like, what the heck is
Okay.
going on?
Yeah, Pacers.
Yeah, but what does that roster look like?
Yeah, exactly. That's the problem. Like Untamed said, that's the problem is what is the package? And like I said, I think some of that will probably answer itself, in the summer, right? Or after the playoffs. Because we'll get a team, like I said, that will lose early and will talk themselves into trading for, a Kevin Durant type player, right?
Yep.
Like it's gonna happen. It's just a matter of which one. San Antonio Spurs might be the best bet.
Yeah. I wouldn't be opposed to it.
Yeah, yes, because I mean, I guess contract wise, I mean, you could probably use like I think Barnes has another year left, so you probably use his contract and then some combination of whoever else you can cobble together. Do you put Vassell in there? I don't know. Do you?
Yeah, you have to. Because I think Stephon Castle shows a little bit more upside. Not that Vassell's bad, but I'd prefer to have Castle long term than Devin Vassell if I'm getting KD.
And Vassell's on a big contract now. His extension has already kicked in.
Yeah.
So.
And now that you have D-Fox, like that signifies what direction that team was trending in anyway. So it's like, they're not looking to be god awful, and they'll have a draft pick. So
yeah, that team has been mentioned, I think, as sort of like a dark horse.
Yeah.
So
I doubt they pull the trigger though. I doubt it.
Right. Like, yeah, because that's the question is like, they're gonna have some picks this year, right? Because they're gonna have whoever they get in the lottery.
Yep.
I don't know who that'll be. Maybe the ping pong balls bounce their way and they get the number one pick.
Don't tee that up. Don't tee that up.
No, I'm just saying like maybe they get the number one pick or maybe they get a top 5. Who knows? And then I think they have the Hawks pick, right? So let's say the Hawks lose the second play-in game and miss the playoffs. You get 2 lottery picks to work with.
I'm scared.
And then you have whatever else you want to use with Wemby. He just has to hopefully recover from his blood clot situation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we've kind of hit all the marks. We talked rumors. We talked pretty much everything that you possibly could for a live stream on the NBA tonight. We appreciate you guys. We will be live tomorrow, like I said, recapping some more play-in stuff, and we will be attempt to, stream, thoroughly and very frequently throughout the playoffs as a whole, because I know, that's kind of a staple on the channel. So we appreciate you guys. Thank you for all the support. If you're Boston, would you trade Jaylen Brown for Cooper Flagg? I mean,
I don't think you can because of his contract. I mean, he makes like what, 50 plus million at this point.
I guess he's saying like, if you're Boston, would you trade for, I guess, like the opportunity where it's like maybe Jaylen Brown for like the number 1 pick?
I mean,
It extends your window, kind of, but at the
but
same
Brown is
time,
already like really good. I mean, like he didn't
yeah, he's
have
a
as good of a
dog.
year this year, but I mean, he just came off a year where he won Finals MVP and had the best year of his career. Like that would be kind of a, I don't think Flag as a rookie would have that level of impact. I mean, like he'd probably be really good, but you
Yeah,
know,
it's a lot of pressure on the kid, Like long
yeah, to
term, I
be,
think he'll be good, but I'm not expecting
yeah.
like, you know,
You're
insane.
saying, yeah? Is he saying yeah? As in like,
The
yeah,
number one, I
exactly.
think he's saying number one, yeah, as in like the number 1 pick.
Oh,
Like if you're Boston, are you trading Jaylen Brown for the number 1
okay,
pick
like just a swap. Okay. Ah,
and whatever else is going to be involved in that?
yeah, I probably still wouldn't do it. I don't
That's
think.
practically blowing it up, low key.
Yeah, because I think because like you have Tatum as your foundational guy, and I think Brown has shown that he's a really good co-piece or whatever you want to call him. I think he proved that his worth as like a one of the best players on a title team. So I don't. I mean,
It depends on how far
financially,
they
we know
go.
that, yeah, financially we know at some point they're gonna have to probably break it up eventually. But if they do, it's probably not going to be them swapping for like some young draft pick. It's probably going to be like, oh, we swap out Drew Holiday with, some other vet that makes, X amount of money per year.
Yeah,
That's my
proven
guess.
talent for proven talent, I think would be the route that they go. And it would probably be one of those scenarios where, they upgrade somehow. They're very good at that, just kind of
Yeah.
fleecing people. But yeah,
Mhm.
it's interesting. I don't think, like, I think Cooper Flag is a generational talent. Like, don't get me wrong. But at the
Mhm.
same time, I need to see him in the league. Like,
Yeah.
dominant in college, one of crazy numbers actually out of the Duke like graduates. He's actually arguably the best Duke graduate. But
Mhm.
I don't know. I just wouldn't really pull that trigger. I don't even think the league would even let that happen. There's no shot they do that. Like, and why would you put all your eggs in one basket for unproven talent? I don't know.
Mhm. Yeah.
But yeah, I think we're gonna head on out of here. It is kind of late. So once again, we have covered everything that we need to cover tonight, and we will see you guys on the next one. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you guys.